So, Jacob, let's start with you. How are voters there in Michigan reacting to what they saw last night?
Oh, Jose, Anna, they are reacting. I can assure you of that. And there's a reason for that. J.D. Vance will be not far away from where I am today in Oakland County, Michigan. And when you talk to people here at Oakland University, they'll tell you that, it's not 1, 2, or 3 days before one of the 4 candidates for either president or vice president will come through here. Oakland County, it's not an exaggeration to say, will be one of the most consequential counties in this swing state come Election Day. That's because there was a 100,000 vote swing from former President Trump in 2016 to President Biden in 2020. And even next door in Macomb County as well, which leans Republican, the student body populace here at Oakland University is made up of largely young people from both of those key counties in Michigan. And all of these issues that we talk about day in and day out are on the minds of the young people here. By the way, Michigan had some of the largest youth voter turnout in the 2022 midterm elections. Gun violence was one of those issues, particularly because of the shooting at MSU and at a high school nearby here back in 2021. And there was a young woman, Jimena, who was the student body president here at Oakland University, who had brought up that issue in advance of the debate. After the debate, I wanted to ask her and her fellow students about how they reacted to the conversation about gun violence during the debate. Here's what they said. What did you think when you heard J.D. Vance talk about that? Jimena was talking about how because of what happened at one of your neighboring schools here, it's an issue that rings close to home.
I thought it was ridiculous. I mean, the issue is guns. The issue is not better locks on doors.
So, that was a notable and I think memorable exchange from the debate when Senator Vance was talking about the solution to gun violence being better locks on doors and stronger windows. It was something I think that certainly resonated with the voters here. And there were all kinds of issues from reproductive rights to immigration that elicited, I think, a strong response. And it wasn't just in favor of the Harris-Walz campaign, but I think here on this campus, which is, like I said, a largely a Democratic-leaning area, it certainly did resonate with them.
And I guess the big question that is on so many minds as we try to read the tea leaves of where this campaign and this election cycle goes next is, after last night's debate, did it move the needle at all in terms of anyone's vote?
I think so. And you know what, Anna? There's one person I think I should probably ask that. Come on in here, Marcus. Marcus was on with me last night. He has gone somewhat viral this morning. Come over here, Marcus. Marcus, we're live on MSNBC. It's good to see you again on campus. Anna Cabrera was just asking me, do you think that the debate last night moved the needle in any way for your fellow students, or they came out of it, as they went into it with their minds already made up of what they're doing?
I would say people were pretty resolved when they came in and when they left. Nobody really had too many opinion changes. If you saw with the flags how we was doing, nobody really deterred in opinion as much. So people were kind of decided going into the thing and then leaving. I know there was one person who kind of flipped,
but I think that was about it. Marcus, it's good to see you, and now the people of America know who Marcus is, Anna and Jose. He made a big impression last night, guys.
Yeah, we played his clip last hour that has gone viral, the one you mentioned. Please thank him for bringing us his civics lesson that he brought to the country last night. And Jacob, good to see you.
Thank you for your civics lesson.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Marcus, and thanks, Jacob. And so, Mark, what were your top takeaways from this debate last night?
Well, the main job of any VP candidate is to do no harm. I don't think either one did any harm. But from just a performance level, you have to give Vance some credit. He was very polished, very smooth. Walz looked very nervous. He was very jumpy. But the interesting thing is that it seemed more like Vance was just trying to rehabilitate his image as a nice guy. It was a very civil debate. I don't think he did the real mission that he had to do was to attack Walz and to make clear that his record was much more out of step with the mainstream America, which he didn't do. So I think he helped himself with Trump. I think he helped himself with MAGA. I don't think he moved. I don't think that the debate changed any minds in the country. The VP debates rarely do. The VP candidates rarely do. So I think the race is structurally the same. I think Vance helped himself with the base, but not with undecided voters.
Simone, how do you see Governor Walz's performance? Did he do what he needed to do for Kamala Harris and their campaign?
Look, I think two things can be true at the same time, right? That I personally walked away from last night's debate thinking, okay, the strategy that the campaign had going into the debate about how, if David says something that I want to counter, it's like, Now, I agree with some of what David said, but instead of saying, David made some interesting points. You don't always have to disagree. You can disagree and not be disagreeable. And I think that there was a little too much, I agree with what so-and-so said.
You think Governor Walz was doing that too much?
I think there were too many niceties on both sides. I mean, from both of the candidates. I mean, truly, J.D. Vance, he stood up on the debate stage, and it was like he was building a platform and policy in real time. Like, there were just some things that he said when it comes to child care, for example, that is not Donald Trump's plan. Like, he articulated a housing plan that I've never heard from the top of the ticket. And in vice presidential debates, that's not what they're usually there to do. But I will just say this. I do think that Governor Walz, he had some very strong moments. And I think he started off shaky, but got stronger. And, like, the Tim Walz that people had seen out there during the Veep stakes, he showed up on that debate stage later on. And the clips are how many people are going to experience this debate. They're not going to watch it straight through like many of us did. And I think in the clips that have been shown, the contrast for Governor Walz is great. And so I think that's good. I think that the campaign has taken one of the better exchanges and flipped it into an ad, that January 6th exchange at the end. That is going to be important because there are some voters out there that need to hear more. They need to be reached. And I'm just not talking about independent voters, base Democratic voters, too.
Yeah, I mean, David, let's talk about it. And by the way, I don't recall ever a debate where one of the candidates described himself at moments as a knucklehead, which is an unusual use of terms. But it was so much more civil. Regardless of what the issues were, it seemed as though there was a lot more civility in the discourse. Is this a benefit for one side more than the other?
I don't think so, but that's because, and I think, Mark laid this out and so did Simone, when you have a vice presidential debate, the only thing that matters is, can people live with you being president for a couple of years should a tragedy occur and you have to assume the job? And Walz got batted all around the stage for most of the night, except for some good moments that he had at times later in the debate. But when we look at the snap polls that occurred afterwards, voters actually thought better of him than we did. And there wasn't a moment or an extended period at all where people said, oh, no, this guy can't get anywhere near the Oval Office. That was one of the problems Sarah Palin had in 2008. It wasn't that she was more conservative than John McCain or that she was younger, or that she was a young governor. It's that people looked at her and said, oh, my God, like, you couldn't do the job, not even do it like in a way that I would disagree with. Just, you can't do it. So that's what Tim Walz and J.D. Vance had to accomplish. J.D. Vance accomplished that a lot better than Tim Walz, but I wonder if J.D. Vance did himself a really big favor for 2028, whether or not he runs for the presidency as the sitting vice president or not.